Hi folks, Astronomy Live here. I've been called out by Thor News to identify a strange giant object that appears to be incoming from Saturn, he says. Well, I've also been asked by some of my viewers in comments to identify this thing that is being seen in stereo ahead HI2, and though I've replied to those comments and given them the information they were asking for, I wanted to make a video about it to identify it and address some of these videos that are being posted about it. So let's take a listen here to what Thor News said.
Bubbles, space bubbles. All right, somebody cue Jazza and Astra so they can come up with the extremely long explanatory video on how this is just a Martian lens flare. Granted, straight lines really don't fit in lens flare physics, but I guarantee you Jazza and Astra will figure it out. So, until we get a long, boring explanation from them on what this is, I will pontificate, because my YouTubes.
Okay, so we actually did address this with them 2 years ago. Both Daza and myself were in a Google Hangout where we explained that this was indeed a lens flare being caused by the planet Venus. Here's the Hangout. It turned out to be about 2 hours long, and I don't want to bore you guys with that entire video, so I'm going to keep this video much shorter, but just hit the major points. So, as with the case 2 years ago, Venus is in the field of view, and it's bright enough to produce this lens flare. Now, 2 years ago, I did a series of videos about this, showing how to process the raw images, both to reveal the stars and to do high contrast enhancement to reveal this strange shape appearing in the images. You can also see a comet here in the view. Now, he also did complain about the shape of the lens flare 2 years ago and suggested that this is an impossible shape for a lens flare to assume, and so he wanted to see another example of a lens flare that looked like that. So that's exactly what I did. I came up with an example of a lens flare that looks like that. You can see this shield shape facing the object that's producing the lens flare, the bright light source, and you can see how it moves opposite that light source in the image. As the light source moves down, the object moves up, etc. And this is exactly what we see in the images now. So here are some of the latest images showing this lens flare forming and approaching the center of the image as Venus approaches the center of the image. And this is exactly the same lens flare that we saw in 2014. And so if we look back at the images from 2014, you can see that as Venus starts to leave the center of the field of view, the lens flare starts to leave the center of the field of view. Now in 2014, stereo head was flipped 180 degrees from where it is today. And the reason for that is because in 2014, stereo head had not yet passed behind the sun. Since then, stereo head has passed all the way behind the sun from Earth's perspective and emerged from the other side. And they flipped the spacecraft at that point 180 degrees in order to continue to monitor the space between the Earth and the Sun. And as a result of that, the images are also flipped 180 degrees because they orient these images relative to the ecliptic. And so the images themselves have been rotated to maintain that orientation. So we did address this in a Google Hangout. This was 2 years ago. And yeah, we showed the same type of lens flare occurring. There's nothing impossible about this. There's nothing terribly unusual about it. You won't find it with every lens, and this is not exactly the same kind of lens as what you would find on stereo head HI2, but it's similar enough that we do get the same general type of lens flare. This, I don't know, he calls it some people call it a shield, some people call it a force field, whatever you want to call it. This shape is being produced as a result of a lens flare from a bright light source. And you can even get straight lines out of lens flares, sure, it's not impossible, just depends on the optics involved. So that's what I demonstrated to him 2 years ago, and I will include a link to this Hangout in the video description if you want to check it out. But I don't expect you to, have to watch a 2-hour video to get a brief explanation here. So I want to do something else that I didn't do during that Hangout, and that is showcase all the previous examples of this same lens flare occurring as a result of Venus being in the field of view of stereohead HI2 over its lifetime. And so we saw that happening in 2014. If you go back a little further into 2014 during July, you can actually see a comet passing by Venus in the view. Now, actually, the comet was much closer to the spacecraft than Venus, so Venus did not actually pass through the tail of the comet or vice versa. It just looks that way from a two-dimensional perspective. But you can see that as Venus moves in towards the center of the image, so does the lens flare. We can look back farther as well. 2012, the same lens flare was present, once again being caused by Venus in the view. And once again, the lens flare is moving opposite Venus. 2011, same thing. 2009, same story. And finally, 2007, same lens flare. So there's nothing terribly new about this. You can find it every time Venus reaches this angular separation from the Sun in stereo HI2. Go ahead, look back in the archives for yourself. You'll see it again and again. It's a recurring lens flare that is present whenever Venus is at that angular separation from the Sun. So I hope that explains it for you guys. If you're wondering where this is all coming from, it actually didn't really start with Thor. I don't know if Thor got it from this video, but a day before Thor's video, Steve Olson, once again, posted a video about stereo HI2, claiming that this was some sort of spaceship. And from there, it just took off and went viral. So Thor and Steve are not the only two to have made videos about this, but I wanted to address it and clear it up for everybody. So now you can see that it's just a recurring lens flare, and I hope that explains it for you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Clear skies, folks.